Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Clarity from Chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. We are approaching the most sacred week in all of Christendom, Easter. In a few short days, Jesus will be betrayed in the garden, and then the Son of God will be crucified, and in so doing, fulfilling the prophecy and absolving mankind of their sins by believing in him. 3 days later, he will rise from the dead and ascend into heaven. His message through his apostles resonate today as it did 2,000 years ago. So everyone, please find a church for Easter Sunday, April 5th, and celebrate with all Christianity the risen King of all kings, Jesus Christ, and his message of salvation. As I did on her first appearance on Clarity, I'm going to read a quote from her book to give you some idea how truly remarkable she and her autistic son are. True stories, especially miracles, are the best kind. They give us a reason to believe in ourselves and others, in good, and mostly the reason to believe in God. After decades of trauma, loss, abuse, and severe autism, one mom decided to give up on the experts and suffering and believe in miracles. So she got one. The prison doors that had trapped her son for over 2 decades were opened, and through his faith and sight, she was given hers. In the ashes of life, they found out that faith in God was capable to do more than they could have imagined, more than was possible. Her son showed her how God literally is everywhere in everything, longing to show himself to us, longing for us to believe in his presence and the power to do good, especially when the world says it's impossible. We are incredibly pleased to welcome back to Clarity the author of the fabulous book, The Book of Heaven, a story of hope for the outcasts, the broken, and those who have lost faith, Miss Katie Asher. Katie's son's story has become the subject of major scientific inquiry and the creation of a #1 podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, hosted by Kai Dickens. Welcome back, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's do a little bit of discussion on your background so people kind of understand where you're coming from, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure thing. So my background is a mom, and I witnessed firsthand my son becoming injured by the vaccines. This wasn't even a question because we ended up in the hospital where a hematologist came in and said, "Your son has a vaccine injury." We didn't know what the effects of that were going to be long term, but it was catastrophic. And I watched my son right in front of my eyes disappear. And he regressed quickly, rapidly, losing skills he once had. Fast forward 21 years. And that's when we learned about a way to coach his motor. And by coaching his motor, I'm literally helping him develop reliable motor to be able to point to letters to spell out what he wants to say. And whenever he began communicating, this is what completely changed our world, because everything that the experts had told us all of that time was false. It was not true. He had been given a diagnosis of severe intellectual disability, IQ of 45. And when he began communicating, we found out that he understood everything, had understood everything. He understood things that the rest of us didn't have, had abilities the rest of us didn't have, could do complex. He did integrals and calculus without ever being taught anything but single digit addition. He was spelling out literally letter by letter the Declaration of Independence, the Gettysburg Address, he was detailing massive amounts of information, much of which I didn't know. And he had incredible spiritual abilities as well. This led me to understand what on earth was going on. And
Wow.
that's really where my skills came in, because my background is writing and research.
Yeah.
And so I was able to use my skill set in research and in writing to understand what had happened with that neurological injury. Why did he suddenly have, or why it wasn't suddenly, he'd had them all that time, but how did he develop these gifts? What did the vaccine injury do to him? And then helping other people to understand the neurology, the physiology, the metaphysical, and how this all interplayed together. So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like in this process, the veil that is pulled down on a lot of us, right, was never affected by your
Yes.
son. I mean, it was kind of, he was a sponge for the entire universe, and it was all being absorbed and collected there, even though he couldn't communicate it. It was coming in, right? It was
He was
there.
perceiving. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is what everybody needs to understand. And whenever it says in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, all things were made through him. Without him, nothing that is made that was made. He is the light of the world, and in him, the light of God is in man. I'm misquoting that last line just a bit, but basically the light of God is in us.
Right. Yeah.
Now, when we are conceived, there is an actual explosion of light. And scientists they're really not sure what it is. Is it zinc? Is it this? They really don't know. But they've literally been able to capture that at conception, there is literally
a burst
explosion
of energy. Yeah.
And that's the soul. And whenever I go into this next part, this will make sense. At that point, how much motor do you think that zygote has? Zero.
Yeah. None.
Like none.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So what begins to develop at that time, I mean, the cells begin to divide, everything else. So what begins to happen is this spirit begins to knit itself to this physical vessel. The organs begin to develop, the fingernails, the whole brain structure. I mean, interestingly enough, your gut is actually, they say that you are what you eat. Your gut's actually your first brain. Your gut develops before your brain does. So that's how.
Well, yeah, I mean, first things first, right?
Gotta eat.
Yeah. We got to set our priorities, for heaven's sake, it's,
So all of these things are happening, but your spirit is whole from the moment you're conceived. That time during development, you're just building a body.
Right.
That's it.
You're just, it's just a carbon unit that is a bit, available to move around, right?
And well, it's really interesting because our spirit is truly knit to certain parts of our body. Like, I mean,
right. Like your heart.
Yes, exactly. So that's, and like our organs are actually what produce the frequencies that we recognize as emotions. So every single part of our body is physical, spiritual, and emotional, or intellectual, or however you want to, but every part of us is all of us.
Right.
And we're all knit together, 3 in 1. So what happens as you develop, I'm going to talk about normal development first. In normal development, the very first thing you do whenever you are born is you begin to orient. Just like when you get a new phone, how the phone has to orient itself. That's what your body does. And so your body and your spirit are trying to figure out where they are in relationship to the body and where the body is in relationship to the environment. So that's what's going on. And this is where you get like the startle reflex with a newborn. Like you pick them up and they go, like that, because they don't know where they are. Now you pick up a 3 or 4 month old, they don't do that because that orientation has happened. So that's where it begins. People think we have 5 senses. We have more than 5 senses. The most primal sense we have is the vestibular system. which is your body's GPS. That's what lets you know what up is, what down is, what's behind, what's in front. Like that's crucial to everything. Your proprioceptive system builds off the vestibular system, and that's what lets you know how much force to use. So it's like, so for example, if I picked up this cup and I thought it was full, but it was empty, well, I would pick it up and I would go, I would use too much force.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not something you consciously, you don't go, I'm going to apply this much force, right? You don't.
Right. No, it's intuitive.
Right. Well, that's your proprioceptive system. Right. It's sensing the environment and it's responding. Hey, sweetie, I need you to go downstairs, okay? Thanks. But it's sensing the environment, adjusting the amount of force it actually applies, and then executes the motor that's necessary. And sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's
Right.
not accurate.
Yep.
So that is the beginning of the motor system. When you're born, how much motor do you have?
Zero.
You have some basic autonomic
Yeah.
nervous systems.
Yeah, right.
You don't even have a correct swallow. Your swallow is actually reversed when you're born. And so what's the first thing after the body orients itself? Then it begins to lift the head up, right? Well, during all of this time, you've got a massive amount of sensory synapses for good reason, to take in as much information as possible to basically do that orientation and develop all these foundational systems. That's required. Now, as you begin to lift your head up and be able to hold your head erect, which your vestibular system, your head has a totally different one than the rest of your body. That's how important your head is. So as that begins to happen, then what's the next reflex? Hand to mouth. Well, that one's important, right? We got to.
Yeah, that's really important.
Really important.
That's really important.
So,
Yep.
So hand to mouth, right? And so then, and what is the baby doing? Well, then the baby is learning how to like lift itself up on its stomach, right? And hold, well, you're developing the core. So all of these are the foundation for motor, that you have to develop the base before you can develop any more complex motor. Now, at that point, how intelligent is that baby?
Not very.
No, it's actually the same.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So intelligence is just the capacity to absorb, perceive, and process information. So the baby's actually brilliant.
I was just going to say all of that, everything that, like when you mentioned, and we're talking about your son, all of that had already been there. It had already,
Yes.
already dropped it,
All of those
dropped
things
this little
had
nugget
happened.
right then.
Yes.
And, and like for most of us, we can't even tune into 10% of it, right?
Correct. Well, so here's what happens. All of us come into this world with these massive perceptive abilities. All of us, because that's what we are as spirit. And a spirit perceives spiritual. And then it's connected to the body. So then it begins the process of perceiving the physical. But it's always perceiving spiritually. And that's what all those massive sensory synapses are capable of perceiving spiritual and physical. This is why little kids can see angels, can see people who've died. And this is why, because they haven't done what I'm about to explain, which is what we all do. And when you begin to develop that motor, the brain begins the process of pruning sensory synapses, which is super important, because you need pruned sensory synapses to develop neural motor pathways to integrate into them, which is what gives us that base to begin to develop more complex motor. This pruning process happens throughout childhood. This is why, as we get older, we feel less and less connected to all of those spiritual, the wonder, the mystical. We get less and less, we get hardened, we get rooted to the physical. And then what do we hear from society? That's not real. That's just your imagination. That's,
Yep.
But I have talked to so many people who as adults go, no, I remember having this gift. I remember being able to see colors in, in other things. I remember being able to taste sound. You know, they remember a time in their life when that was their perception. Well, that's essentially because during the motor development process, the sensory prunes, the motor integrates with the sensory, and then it becomes more and more fine-tuned, which is why we develop fine motor over time, because you have to, again, build the base, build everything before you can build the acute skills.
We've had
So
all our creativity slapped out of us as we grew
that's
older.
exactly right. And
Right.
that is because that's right brain. And that's where, and the schools want left brain. They want logic, reason, which is good. I mean, it's not bad,
Yeah, but they don't want to recognize the other side of it at all.
which is brilliant. So what we have with non-speakers is several things have happened. So they're going along, an injury happens. This injury, very first thing it does, and just so everybody knows what's in the vaccines that's causing this. Well, number one, it's the adjuvants. That's absolutely part of the worst offender, particularly aluminum. Aluminum has an atomic number of 13. Now, for people who don't know, you get 2 electrons in the first shell, 4 pairs in every shell after that. The valence shell is the outer shell, and that's what determines how reactive it is with other elements and other cells, everything. That is key. Aluminum being 13, you have 2, 8, 3, highly electronegative. So it starts pulling electrons from other cells to fill its valence shell. Well, then what do those cells do? Then they pull cells and they pull. And so then what it causes is a chain reaction. This is why vaccine manufacturers said we can't make them safe, because they can't control that reaction. In one person, it happens and they reach homeostasis very quickly. And then everything's, okay, not great, but it's okay. In someone else like my son, it triggers off a cytokine storm. Interleukin 6, which is part of the immune system, gets triggered, a cytokine storm of interleukin 6, which causes massive autoimmune injury. The body starts killing off itself.
And just so people can understand what you're talking about here, this is literally what the atomic bomb is. So if you're having trouble trying to understand what Katie is talking about here, the chain reaction of events that happen on a molecular level is the same thing as if you looked out onto the horizon and saw a mushroom cloud and
Yes.
considered that inside your body and the cells and everything that are moving through your body. That's what's going on.
Mhm.
So, if you're having trouble understanding what Katie's talking about here, just imagine an atomic bomb, or your vision of what you think an atomic bomb looks like. And that's on a molecular level is exactly what's going on here.
Now, here's what happens next. So this autoimmune cytokine storm starts going off. What do you think it's going to destroy? Well, we actually have MRI pictures of exactly what it does. And it starts attacking the myelin on the neural motor pathways that have already formed. This is what causes regression. This is why parents say he lost skills he once had. Why? Because the myelin on the neural motor sheath was attacked by the immune system, basically destroyed. We have pictures where they're white spots in the brains of these little kids. And that is where the autoimmune attack is literally destroying the neural motor pathways. So then they still have massive amounts of sensory synapses, but the myelin on those neural pathways, so they've lost abilities, right? But it also goes off like this bomb, which of course causes encephalopathy. Well, what does that do? Well, that has massive effects on the 12 cranial nerves in the brain. And these cranial nerves are critical to what? Well, you've got the vagus nerve, which of course controls rest and digestion and regulation, all of those things. So now their enteric nervous system doesn't work. That's your gut for everybody. So that's not working well. Then of course, it also causes issues in the liver and the kidneys, which of course prevents the ability of the body to detoxify. It strips the lining in the gut and this is where we have a lot of gut issues with these kids. Well, that means not only are toxins leaking into the bloodstream, but now they can't absorb nutrients. So they have a lack of nutrients, but they also can't get rid of the toxins. Many of the behaviors that they call them, you know what they actually are? Ammonia toxicity. They can't excrete the ammonia. And it's called a behavior. And so then, okay, what does encephalopathy do to the optic nerve? What does it do? Well, it actually causes binocular dysfunction, visual suppression, blindness. Houston sees triple of everything. It moves, and he has alternating blindness, sometimes both blindness. Well, that affects your vestibular system, which is where you are in space, which affects your proprioceptive system, which is how you know how much force to use. So not only are they have, the autoimmune, where it's causing all kinds of neurological
And
inflammation.
physiological. Yeah, and
Yes, and
physiological.
physiological.
Yeah. But then you're
So
completely discombobulated, right?
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so then the neural motor pathways, which is that is behavior, that is what gives us the ability to control this vessel and execute intentional motor planning. When that doesn't exist, it's like you trying to run the vacuum cleaner without it being plugged in. You can turn it, you can push it back and forth all day long. That is you exhibiting your will. I'm going to push this vacuum cleaner, but it's not going to do anything because it's not plugged into the power source. So it can't actually execute what it needs to do.
Right.
And that's how vaccines cause autism, and also how they still retain all of this spiritual insight and ability, because being disconnected from your body, instead of developing more and more into their physical body, they develop more and more into their etheric body, their spirit.
Yeah, exactly. So let me pause for a second and move down this other little pathway. I know RFK Jr. has come out pretty strongly, and I think the Surgeon General has as well,
Mhm.
to try to start to pin down the causality of autism. What are your thoughts? Do you think they're making any headway? Because I know they're fighting big pharma, and the minute that RFK Jr. came out and said Tylenol was one of the key culprits
Mhm.
in autism, big pharma went absolutely nuts,
Right.
which
But
you would
Trump
expect, right? So,
Trump didn't do a fabulous job. He's not the best orator, and he didn't explain it well. I don't know
right.
if that was intentional or
Well, well, no, I would say, Katie, that Republicans, other than a couple of them, and maybe John Kennedy being excluded because he can articulate things pretty well.
Mhm.
They do just a poor job of communicating anything.
Truly.
They
That is
really
such an
do,
understatement.
which is unfortunate,
Mhm.
but there it is. They just
Yeah.
don't. They just cannot take a complex topic like we're talking about here
Mhm.
and pull it apart enough to where Mr. and Mrs. America can understand
Yeah.
what in the world's going on here, because they've just gone through COVID and they've been lied to by everybody from the corner pharmacy all the way up to the White House about what's going on. And they don't know what the hell to believe. And unfortunately, the educational system in this country is so piss poor, pardon my French, that they don't know how to connect the dots, nor do they even desire to connect the dots, unfortunately.
Well, you have to go back to who's profiting off things the way they are.
Right. Yeah.
And that is so, I mean, schools doing a poor job is one thing, but in reality, the people who go into the field of vaccinology, they are literally taught false
Yeah.
information.
Well,
And they are diehard believers in it. So it's like it's a doctrine. You've believed a doctrine, and for anyone who hasn't read it, please read Dissolving Illusions by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. She takes you through the entire history of vaccinology from the very beginning with smallpox, and she exposes it is horrific when you actually get down and see the
yeah.
lies that we believe. And
Well, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. And so,
it's unfortunate because people are just inundated with this crap on a daily basis through social media, media in general, and that's, video, written, radio, everything else. And a perfect example, if you don't think you're being manipulated, just look at what the country with a few people didn't get vaccinated and how shamed they were and
for
how
sure.
and fired, taken, I mean, we had the military, people in the military were being kicked out of the military and everything else. So they basically shamed everybody into following the lie. And I
Hmm.
and I think that goes
Didn't even
on.
say shamed them. They literally, it was
Well, lie. Yeah.
Yeah, it
They
was like,
yeah.
it was coercion.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I did want to get out that number one, big pharma is nobody's friend, and I don't really care what your thoughts on it are, but there is mountains of
Well,
evidence. Go ahead.
let's go back to the
Okay.
who's making what money? How does this all work? Okay.
Okay.
So 1986, there were massive numbers of children suffering from catastrophic neurological injury from vaccines, and so many that there were only three vaccine manufacturers of childhood vaccines still remaining in that. Um, uh, and each of them only produced one vaccine. Literally Laboratories, which was producing the DTP shot at the time, which is what injured my son. And that's the shot he got, which was the live cell vaccine, by the way. Uh, it was facing cases, liability, 200 times its profit. When Reagan signed the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act, it's horrific what he did, but and I grew up loving Reagan. I didn't know that Reagan did this. I didn't know that my son was going to be injured as a result of what he did. I didn't know. But what he did was, first he believed them, and that was mistake number one. And the second was that he believed the lie that we needed vaccines to keep Americans safe. Okay, that was what he
Yeah.
believed.
Yeah.
And that's not true, but that is a very old lie that people have believed for a long time. You go back to 1976 or 9, I can't remember, but anyway, head of Harvard, I think it was head of Harvard Medical School, got up, did this huge thing, basically exposing vaccines and saying, if you think that where we are right now is a result of vaccines, you're not taking a good look at the data. Because what had happened was the rates of all of these diseases had already dropped before the vaccines were being introduced. And then the pharmacy companies were claiming that it was them that had lowered the rates, when that's actually not true at all. It's nutrition, it's better sanitation, it's people not living as close, because there were massive amounts of, just horrible contamination from people living so close together during all of these years, and diseases were rampant. There was no sanitation, no nutrition, poor maternal health, which of course makes you weaker, all these different things. One of the biggest was sanitation and diet. That had and our improvements, the engineers are actually who did more to reduce disease in this country, especially death from disease. It's the engineers. It was not the medical community at all. They
Right.
didn't actually do a good job with much
No.
at all.
No. I
They're
would
good with
agree.
stitches. That's about, you're good at sewing stitches. So seamstresses, they're great seamstresses. So that is what kind of set the scenario. Well, once the vaccine manufacturers saw this setup, that they now were free of liability, they just started manufacturing all of these different, products. That's what this is. It's a product. And there shouldn't be a product that, number one, is mandated. And number two, you can put any neurotoxin into it. Aluminum is a neurotoxin. It has absolutely no business being in the human body, and then have no liability for the effects that it has. Now, in the Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, there was also the HHS, and this is where we get to RFK. HHS is responsible for making sure that vaccine manufacturers are continuing to prove the safety of vaccines, childhood vaccines. They're required to every 2 years. This is where the council, they're supposed to have this council. That's where the council comes in. They're supposed to, have a council. They're supposed to actively be making them safer. And they're supposed to produce a report to give to Congress every 2 years about what they have done to make vaccines safer. Do you know how many times they've produced that report?
Once.
0.
Okay.
None. They've never done it. They've never tried to make it safer. They've just continued to produce more vaccines and put more and more adjuvants and different other chemical additives, fetal tissues, all kinds of horrific things, formaldehyde. These are the substances that are in the vaccine. A lot of times they've actually tested the vials that say there's this much amount, and they actually go to test it, and it has a totally different amount than it actually says on the bottle. These things also don't settle necessarily the same in the bottle. So a doctor's shaking it this much versus
Right.
you're going to get a different concentration.
Yep.
So there's a lot of different factors involved. Then, of course, you have the child themselves. And for example, I don't know that Houston was producing enough glycoprotein, which would have contributed to him having immune thrombocytopenic purpura, which is that was the vaccine injury. That is the body's inability to identify what is self and what is non-foreign. So it's basically like the name tag. It says, don't attack this. This is us. So
Right.
I don't have proof of that, but that based on the research I've done, because obviously I wasn't testing, gee, how much glycoprotein, honey, do you have? Because I didn't even know that word existed.
Right.
But based on the research I've done now, looking back, that seems likely to have been. So there's no testing on children to see, is their cellular structure where it should be? What is the chemical reaction going to be? And they can't control it. Bottom line, they can't control the reaction.
Yeah. And my fear is I don't think we haven't even begun to see what the long-term effects are going to be from the crap that they did with COVID.
Well, they've already had
I mean,
fertility dropped,
right.
birth rates dropped drastically.
Yeah.
Babies were dying. The placenta wasn't attaching. All
Right.
kinds of horrible things.
Yeah.
Another great book everybody should read is Crimes Against Humanity, the Pfizer Papers. That is a labor of love. I think it was 3,500 volunteers in different fields, all these different fields, who came together under a project manager and went through the Pfizer papers so that each one focused on what their expertise was so that they could actually glean what the Pfizer papers actually said. Then they put it all together and created this just mind-blowing labor of truth that the American people need to understand. Also, Germany just had, it's online, so everybody should go watch it. They've translated it for us. Hearings about the COVID deaths and the research that were covered up in Germany. And they knew, they literally knew that these were untested products, and they had it in their paperwork that the testing was going to be when the public received it.
Yeah,
we
it was
were
going
the
to be.
test.
Yeah, it was going to be. It was going to be a live test. It wasn't. It wasn't any kind of stage testing.
Well, there's no informed consent, and then you're mandating it. So that's a huge issue.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I
Go
do
ahead.
think that RFK is, I truly do believe he's making incredible progress, even though it is slow and we are fighting Big Pharma. Big Pharma makes, from childhood vaccines alone, not any of the other stuff, it makes $54 billion a year from childhood vaccines alone. And this is where you have to see who's profiting off this. The media, obviously their vaccine manufacturers have their drug companies, so they make other products too, but they pay big media $13 billion a year. They pay Congress $450 million a year. They have a lot of other little side hustles that they're also helping to support as well.
Right.
And all of these, and the thing about autism is you're not just totally injured for life. Like, you also have chronic health conditions the rest of your life that you are continuing to give them money
Right.
for.
Right.
They've
Yeah.
literally injured the population to profit off of them
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and with no liability.
yeah.
How is
Yeah.
this not?
Yeah. No liability, and with the full knowledge that this is what they're doing.
They
And
do
and
know.
if you can't tell me that isn't the essence of pure evil when you know that you're doing. I could almost get past the point where I didn't know, and if they truly didn't know, but I know that they did know. And
Well, how do we know that they know? I know I'm being facetious.
well, why don't you tell us?
Okay, how many, because they always say, vaccines don't cause autism. How do you know? Show us the studies that prove it.
Yeah.
Show us the studies that prove that these, the DTaP, the MMR, the, Hep B, that and go through the list. Show us the studies that prove that vaccines don't cause autism. Guess how long the studies are? The longest day trial was a few months. Most of them were only 8 days, 5 to 8 days long. How on earth would you know, since neurological injuries take far longer? My son, it was 5 days after his vaccine before it started. He wouldn't have even shown up in that
In
injury,
that window.
in that
Yeah.
study. He wouldn't have even shown up.
Yeah.
Some of them were only 3 days. So they're, oh, fever. Okay, they're better. Okay, see, it's all good. No study in how they react with each other, which we know once you have triggered an autoimmune reaction and then you get more vaccines triggering that autoimmune reaction even more, you're going to have a more catastrophic impact on the immune system. Once that autoimmunity is triggered, that inflammation, it can't calm down. Also, everybody should know most of these childhood vaccines contain strains of strep. Strep can cause massive psychiatric effects on the neurological system if it is triggered in an autoimmune condition. So
God.
my son still has strep and also aluminum in the brain, and you can't get that out. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
just that.
There's not a filter for it. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your son's spiritual connection, because I know that's deeply important to you, and it's the basis for all of this, right?
Yes. Well, um, I was I was angry and knew that my son had been injured
Sure.
all those years. So I would say that part like triggers all my, my mama
Right.
bear.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. Exactly. Right.
But also, I don't want any other family to go through what we have experienced. I don't want them to, some people are like, well, but he's got all these gifts. So isn't it great? Like, kind of like that. And to not be known, to not be able to communicate, to not be able to tell what your needs are, to be misunderstood, to be deprived of all of your rights, deprived of an education, of all friendships, all interactions, all social activities, excluded from society, put in the basement so you don't bother all the normal people, have your family basically become castaways, just totally outcast from society. That is so much trauma. Not to mention all the times that you go and your body takes off and injures you and tries to drown you and, throws yourself, into all of these horrific and elopes in front of cars and you get hit by a car. My son was hit by a truck when he was 3 years old. He had more near drownings than I can even tell you. He got lost naked more times. And what about the dignity? Like you're running around naked. Literally, you're running around naked. Everybody thinks you're a fool. They're still aware of what's going on and know how people see them and how they treat them and how they're perceived. And if you think that that doesn't have a devastating, emotional, traumatic response, you have no heart. No, I don't want anyone to go through this. Now, God is so much bigger than even the worst things that humankind has done to each other. And this is where we get back to Genesis 50:20, where when Joseph was thrown into that pit and then sold into slavery and then had to work for Potiphar and was falsely accused and then thrown into prison and kept there for decades. That's a very long time to despair that God is going to answer your prayers and rescue you. And yet God did. And so God rescued my son too. And whenever his brothers were terrified after their father died, and they were so terrified of what Joseph was going to do to them, because he had every right to kill them, have them killed. He had the power, and he certainly had a good reason. And they were terrified. And he said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, for the saving of many lives. That's what is occurring with my son's gifts and these other non-speakers and their incredible gifts, is they are testifying to the truth of the word, of the God's word, of scripture.
Right.
They are
Yep.
testifying to the truth of it, to the truth of Christ, to the truth of the cross, of the atonement, to the truth and the power in the blood of the Lamb. They are testifying it. They have given everything to be a testament to the Lord. And do you know why? They said, because the love of God is so incredible. They don't want anyone to
To
know.
be without it. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Well said.
And that's how incredible their forgiveness is. Are they angry? Of course, they've lost. But they have taken their pain and their injustice, and they have given it to God. And they're trusting God with it. Now, as a mom, I'm going to take out Big Pharma. But for everybody else,
Yeah, of course. Of course. You know, that's
responsibility.
that's right. That's right. Damn it.
I'm taking out the bullies.
Yes,
So, yeah.
exactly.
And please join me. Please help.
Oh.
I need all the help we can get.
I'm in. I'm fully in, dear.
Yeah.
I'm fully in. So, social media connections. Where can people find more? I know we have, Dickens is doing the telepathy tapes. Where can people find those social media connections,
Yes.
Katie, so that they can get more information around this?
So for anyone who hasn't listened to the telepathy tapes, I definitely encourage season 1. She gets a little.
She's a little
She
off the
takes
reservation
Yes.
on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
Season 2, she goes really far off. So
Yeah. Yeah.
don't need to
She's
listen to that
drifted a little afield. She's
Yes.
she's yeah.
Now, I
Okay.
will say that I have at least seen a pretty close to, complete cut for the documentary. And that is much more solid to our stories. So I'm very encouraged by that. That should be coming out this summer. It was very good. Did not shy away from the spiritual.
Good.
Didn't focus on Jesus. So everybody needs to go read the book. So they
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that-
Yeah.
and that's the Book of Heaven. So listen to the telepathy tapes first season. You'll at least get a taste of what we're talking about, and how incredible their gifts are. The documentary will come out this summer, and that'll be streamed. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say where it's being streamed yet, so I'm gonna not say it because I'm not sure I have
Okay.
permission. I don't want to mess up. So
Yeah. So where can people find the Book of Heaven?
the Book of Heaven is available on Amazon, and my daughter is literally in the process of putting it on the ACX, the audiobook. So
Wow.
it will be available on audiobook within days. Like they would just have to get it approved by the ACX platform. So that's exciting. Social media, I've got Asher House Hope on TikTok and Instagram, KT Asher 5 on X. And if you need to email me, I'm more than happy. If you don't use Amazon and you would like a signed copy, you can email us at asher.house.hope@gmail.com. Unfortunately, I'm not Amazon, so you do have to pay for shipping, which is kind of stinks, but we do our very best. Oh, and asher.house is our website, which I have some resources on there, some videos, some old interviews that I've done. I need to update it and get more on there. People ask questions, and I try to just do resources that I've used with Houston that I find to be very helpful. He likes, but basically these non-speakers, the reason their bodies are so completely dysregulated is because they're taking in too much information and they don't have the motor planning to execute in a way that is meaningful and intentional to tell you what's really going on. In addition to that, they're experiencing the spiritual realm in overdrive. So many times they're experiencing spiritual attacks, which is really horrifying that you can't even see what your kid's experiencing. So I want everybody to know what the Word of God says about spiritual warfare and what we have in Him to protect ourselves, which is the Word, which is the body and blood of Jesus Christ, which is the sacraments and to be in communion with each other and to be praying with faith and all those old things that you thought were like, this is just like, no, it's actually
Yeah.
how the spiritual war is fought.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to thank you, Katie, again for being on the show. It's been such a delight. And I want to thank the audience for listening. But before we conclude, I've got a couple of scriptures I want to share. The first one from Jeremiah 29:11. And it's, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope." And from Hebrews 11:1, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." And if you need guidance, all that is needed is to bend a knee and pray. Then get up and work. So thanks again, Katie. It's been an absolute pleasure and a joy to speak with you.
Love being here. You're so great. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Well, thanks again, and we'll do this again soon.
All right.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody. And happy Resurrection Day.
Yes.
It's coming.
It's coming.
He's risen. He's risen indeed.
Yes, it's coming. Thank you, dear. Be
You're
well.
so welcome. Thank
you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.